When Spanish ships landed in Mexico in 1519, the mighty Aztec Empire was at the height of its power. From their capital at Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs controlled much of what is now Mexico and Central America, ruling some 15 million people. Aztec palaces were as vast and sophisticated as any of those in Europe, and their temples rivaled the Egyptian pyramids. But within just 2 years, the mighty Aztec Empire crumbled, and Tenochtitlan lay in ruins after a brutal siege led by Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés. No great ancient civilization ever fell so far, so fast. What happened to the Aztecs? For one thing, they had too many enemies. For years, the Aztecs used brutal force against neighboring tribes and city-states, forcing them to pay costly tributes and hand over victims for the human sacrifices central to the Aztec religion. Cortés turned these people's hatred of the Aztecs to his advantage. Spanish invaders also had superior weapons, plus guns, trained horses and dogs, and fully loaded warships that allowed them to overcome the Aztecs' greater numbers. Ineffective leadership also played a role in the fall of the Aztecs. Their emperor, Montezuma, believed Cortés might be the bearded Aztec god who was prophesied to conquer his people and bring universal peace. Unsure how to confront the Spanish leader, he was captured in 1520 and was later killed, possibly by his own people. His brother Cuitlahuac took over, leading an army that drove the Spaniards from Tenochtitlan. But the Aztecs then confronted another powerful enemy, smallpox. Brought aboard Spanish ships, the disease decimated the Aztec population, killing the new emperor and thousands of others. With the help of several thousand Indians, including Texcacans, Chalca, and Tepanec, Cortés and his Spanish force besieged Tenochtitlan, cutting off the city's water and food supplies. Despite a fierce resistance, the Aztec city fell on August 13, 1521. More than 200,000 people died in the struggle. With the Aztec Empire effectively destroyed, Cortés became governor and captain general of New Spain in 1522. Under Spanish rule, Mexico City rose from the ruins of Tenochtitlan, and Christianity spread throughout the region, replacing the temples and traditions of a once great ancient civilization.
Segment 1. The Aztecs.
They began as nomads who settled the Valley of Mexico in AD 1200. By AD 1500, they had built a capital city that rivaled the glory of London and Paris. Just 20 years later, though, one of America's first great civilizations would lie in ruins, destroyed by seekers of gold. The Aztecs built an empire the same way the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans had, by conquering their neighbors. After settling in the fertile valley at the heart of present-day Mexico, this small but fierce band of warriors struck out against rival tribes, eventually bringing them all under Aztec control. As their empire grew, the Aztecs built a spectacular capital, Tenochtitlan, to honor their gods. Fortified on an island on Lake Texcoco, Tenochtitlan boasted magnificent flat-top pyramids, crowned by temples to their gods. Inside, the Aztecs paid their debt to the sun god. The Aztecs believed that unless they offered human blood to the god, the sun wouldn't rise the next day. But as important as religion was to the Aztecs, it was their economic system that fed the empire's growth. Conquered tribes were taxed heavily. They were required to send fine cloth, food, and jewelry to the Aztec emperor, or else. At the height of their empire in the early 1500s, the Aztecs were ruled by a man named Montezuma. Like many European kings of that time, Montezuma was seen by his people as a divine ruler, a ruler appointed by God. Montezuma's kingdom covered 200,000 miles of Central America and included more than 25 million subjects. His army was 400,000 soldiers strong. Despite his empire's wealth and power, Montezuma was about to face a crisis that would threaten everything his people had built. The Spanish conquistador, Hernán Cortés, had arrived in Mexico, and he was headed for Tenochtitlan. But from the reports he received, Montezuma didn't recognize Cortés as a foreign invader. With his white skin and beard, Cortés resembled a figure from ancient Aztec mythology, the great god Quetzalcoatl. Banished from Mexico in the distant past, the legendary Quetzalcoatl had vowed to return one day and reclaim his throne. It so happened that Cortés arrived during the year 1 Reed on the Aztec calendar, the exact year Quetzalcoatl was supposed to return. Was this white stranger an Aztec god? Montezuma decided not to attack, a decision he would regret. He allowed the Spaniards to reach the outskirts of the Aztec capital in November of 1519. Before long, Montezuma realized his mistake and sent gifts to appease the Spaniards. He sent envoys bearing gold, hoping the strangers would take the gifts and leave. All Montezuma's gifts did, however, was prove to Cortés that the Aztecs were rich with gold. Cortés was now more determined than ever to reach Tenochtitlan. When he finally got there, Cortés was not disappointed. With a population of 250,000, Tenochtitlan surpassed even the largest cities in Europe. Montezuma was equally impressive. For his meeting with Cortés, he dressed the part of the New World's most powerful man. As the two sides approached each other, the air grew thick with excitement. Cortés explained he'd come in peace, the ambassador of a great emperor from far across the sea. Montezuma welcomed him as a most honored guest and invited him to stay in one of his palaces. Friendliness, though, soon gave way to fear. News arrived that the Aztecs had attacked Veracruz, the colony Cortés had established along the coast 200 miles away. Montezuma denied responsibility. But Cortés did the unthinkable. He placed Montezuma under arrest in his own palace. Amazingly, the emperor submitted without a struggle. To this day, no one knows why. Montezuma's authority gradually weakened. The Aztecs did stage an uprising against the Spanish invaders, but not led by Montezuma. The Spaniards claimed Montezuma was stoned by his own people. The Aztecs insisted he was murdered by the Spanish. Whatever the case, by the summer of 1520, the situation in Tenochtitlan had reached total chaos. Cortés and his men decided to grab as much gold as possible and make a run for it. With the Spaniards retreating, the Aztecs might have recovered. But the conquistadors had brought with them something much more deadly than rifles and cannons: disease. The Aztecs were devastated by what they called the Great Rash, smallpox. This highly infectious and fatal virus left them stricken with high fever, aches, and blisters all over their bodies. More than half the population would die of the germs. Cortés and his army returned and laid waste to Tenochtitlan. The Aztec temples were burned. In 3 months, the mighty capital was reduced to ashes. Cortés would go on to build a new colony on top of Tenochtitlan. Thousands of Spaniards would flock to Mexico City, the capital of Spain's new empire in the Americas.
We're in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City looking at an amazingly beautiful feathered headdress.
This is a replica of a feathered headdress that's currently in a museum in Vienna, sent to Europe by Hernán Cortés, the Spanish conquistador who defeated the Aztecs.
So Cortés comes in with his army of Spanish soldiers, conquers the Aztec people, and is overwhelmed by the beauty of much of what he sees, especially these feathered objects, and sends a lot of them back to Spain, to Charles V. I can see why he would send these objects back. There's nothing like it in Spain that I can think of.
And even though this is a replica, it gives us a really good sense of what some of these feather objects would have looked like. And you have these stunning quetzal tail feathers, which only come from the male quetzal, and we see so many of them. And usually the bird only has 2-3 tail feathers. So these come from a lot of different quetzals. A kind of bird that you find in Central America, places like Costa Rica. So what this is speaking to is the long-distance trade that's happening, as well as tribute items that are sent back to the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan.
So the Aztecs have an empire with lots of cities that they've conquered, and what they exact from those cities is luxury goods. And that includes feathers, that includes textiles, cacao, shells, and they're all coming to the capital of the empire, which is actually here in what is present-day Mexico City, but was then Tenochtitlan. Did I say that right?
Almost. Tenochtitlan.
So the feathers we have to imagine as part of an entire costume. And in so much Aztec art, we see not only the feather headdress, but we see paper ornaments, we see other kinds of elaborate aspects of costume that were part of rituals, part of performances.
Costume was incredibly important to the Aztecs, as it was to many Mesoamerican cultures. And what's unfortunate for us is we're seeing this here as a static item, but imagine feathers with this beautiful iridescence shimmering in the light and moving with wind and being danced and able to transform the ruler wearing this into something else entirely. If you see where you're supposed to place this on top of your head, and then you see the extent to which the feathers radiate outwards, it's almost like your identity becomes less important than what you're wearing.
You're completely subsumed by this costume.
And besides these gorgeous quetzal feathers, what we have here are pure gold ornaments, as well as other colors of feathers like a beautiful turquoise blue.
The people who made this lived in a special quarter of the capital and sends a lot of them back to Spain, to Charles V.